right. Well, the term needs no introduction is really stupid. Gareth Cliff. There you go. How's that for an
How are
intro?
you, sir? Yeah,
Lovely
that's
to
the
see
best
you.
intro I've ever heard. Nothing worse than when and you know this, when you go on stage and people give you this long, boring, dreary introduction filled with awards and accolades that you don't even remember receiving and that mean nothing
Yes,
to you in the first place. Dreary as hell. So I'm happy to be on with someone who can just say, here he is, get on with it. What do you want to talk about?
I do have. I only realized while I was saying it that one of my worst irks is needs no introduction. That particular
Oh,
phrase is really
God.
fucking annoying because
No.
it's preceded by the 11 minutes you've just spoken about.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
usually
yeah.
they say that about people who actually do need an introduction. Like they'll say, here's the chief product engineer at Google, who, if you didn't know was the chief product engineer at Google, would be about as interesting as meeting someone rather ugly and squat at the bar.
And you are actually, as a compliment, don't need an introduction.
Well,
So
I'm sure there are lots of people watching you now who probably have no idea who I am. Anyway, I'm
I,
Gareth Cliff. I've done TV and radio for a while. I've known John Savage a long time. Massive
I feel like
admirer
we're
of what
in
he's done.
an 80s music video where we're both wearing black and our backgrounds are really black. It's
Well, I'm actually at the sea. You might be
oh
able to just catch a glimpse of
oh
the
okay. Well, that's
ocean
different. It
behind
looked like
me.
a studio room, and now I see you with a white picket
No,
fence on the side of the
no,
sea.
I'm at my holiday house, which is in KZN, which is lovely, and I don't come here nearly as often as I'd like, but it's always warm and lovely, and I'm sitting outside in a t-shirt. And as far as you're
Love your
concerned, and
work.
everyone else, I'm wearing no pants.
Well, I don't think pants have had anything to do with the last 6 months. I don't think they.
Look, first of all,
Wearing.
thank you very much for this. This is a
All right.
marvelous whiskey. You want to
This
start with
is
that?
now. Let me tell you what it's about because there's only. So the whole point of this podcast is really, the opening question is what's your poison? So like, what do you
Mm.
drink, smoke, do that's bad for
Hmm.
you? And you can
Yeah.
answer that. And then the idea is to actually hand select different whiskeys for the guests that I think they might suit their personality. And I don't know. I mean, do you know that shop in Hyde Park called Whiskey Bros? Because I'm a big
I
whiskey
do.
drinker. Yeah,
I
so
do.
they help me with this part. That's like a candy store for me, and so they give me. So they basically give, and for you because I think they're also they're obviously big fans. We got this hugely limited edition. There's only available in South Africa. It's hand bottled by the Whiskey Bros. There's only one single cask of this.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I feel it's a huge waste to waste it on you.
I agree with that. So
Bottle
cheers to that.
405 out of 644.
I'm on 196 of 644, and just for you at
Okay.
home, this is a what's it? 11-year-old. I don't know. Glen.
Glen Dronach,
You do
cask
that.
bottle 2008, exclusively bottled for Whiskey Brother, single malt Highland whiskey from Scotland.
You did very good there. Uh,
Thank you.
and
That's
I'll tell you
kind
what
of
it's
you.
supposed to taste like.
Aye.
On the nose, I mean, this shit means nothing to me. Buttered raisin and olive bread with oak, balsam, and ginger.
Oh,
And
aye.
on the palate,
Aye.
raisin and crystallized ginger with cream caramel.
Aye.
And
I'll
then it's
probably just taste the ethanol, which is purely poisonous.
all right. Should we give it a
Good.
go?
Are we going to open these? It's such
Let's
a
do it.
disgrace to open this for such a pointless occasion as this. But let's go.
That's the beauty of it. The
All right.
pointlessness of
Good.
I'll tell you something. This podcast
So
is like it's a
okay.
slight
So
bane.
can I let
Yeah.
me add something of value, because if we just sit here talking nonsense, I think your audience will probably lose interest. I went to Scotland in about 2008 on a trip with Diageo. They organized everything. We stayed in a castle called Drumure, which is in the Spey Valley, and it belongs to them. It belongs to Diageo. That sounds good. And they taught me there about how they make whiskey, and they showed me how the place that makes the barrels works, and what spring they get the water from, and how the mash tun, which is the machine that they actually create the distill in. It's a giant copper kettle, effectively. they showed me all of this in Scotland, and I can admit now, because I'm not so
Mm.
embarrassed anymore, that at the time I was a complete whiskey Philistine. I did leave the Castle of Drumure with an appreciation for whiskey, which I didn't have before, and which I think has enriched me to a large degree. This stuff, I can tell you now, is they call it a Highland single malt. Now, there are basically 4 or 5 areas in Scotland that whiskies can come from. Speyside is the place that I'm most familiar with because of that stay with Diageo. But there's the stuff that they do in the islands in the west of Scotland, which is a lot more peaty and for people who like a very rich, very hearty taste to their vodka. Kind of you almost eat it instead of drink it. Those people like the Western Island stuff. The Highland stuff, which is what we're drinking now, is quite sophisticated, despite the fact that Highlanders were not. They were the most rural and backward of all the Scots, and that's saying something because the Scots are generally rural and backward. And this is very good.
Well, cheers.
Cheers to you, John Savage. So, what's the point of this thing? What do you do? What do you do with this? What's the podcast?
Well, this is the thing that's funny about it is that, I was gonna say like fucking digital radio is hard, motherfucking hard. And with my radio station, I really feel that like I made some of the best radio programs that nobody gave a shit about for like really deep stuff. I was so invested in this sort of content strategy of important content. And the things that bubbled to the top were 2 things that sort of I had all the big stars. I did all of the things. The 2 shows that outperformed everything was this nonsense show, which was just like a sideline for fun, and Trav's DJ show, which was also just an experiment, which sometimes gets like hundreds of thousands of live views and listeners. The 2 things that sort of required the least thought, that were sort of pointless, have been the highest performing stuff out of all this like really like amazing stuff. And
Why
so
do
I
you think that
actually,
is?
well, it's a good question. Let me ask you that.
Well, it's because it's authentic. It's real. It's
Hmm.
the stuff, obviously, that you put the least effort into because you already care about it the most. So you don't necessarily feel like it's a chore. It's something that you enjoy doing. You probably have interesting conversations with people you would be interested in talking to anyway. So it doesn't feel like work. Remember that the greatest carpenters and masons and artists and musicians in all of human history are the ones who didn't know they were creating all that stuff while they were creating it. They were just doing the thing that they loved the most, that they felt was easy for them because they were genuinely talented at it.
Look, I get that, and you're not wrong. I do think there was, yeah. I mean, there was other stuff that also had those qualities, but I don't know. It's a difficult terrain. I mean, how have you found? I mean, I watch you very closely because when you jumped off of traditional into the digital space, I was extremely jealous because it was something I was thinking about doing, and I was watching you. I liked how you moved, but it's a fucking hard space. How are you finding it? How have you found it?
It's a very real space, though. It's a very honest place. It's rewarding in ways that traditional radio was not. I'm not
Uh,
interested in having 2 or 3 million listeners ever again in my life. I genuinely disliked my audience on FM radio because those people would get in the car and they'd tune into whatever was on, and it sometimes happened to be me. And maybe they didn't even listen for me. Maybe they were just listening for their favorite song, which they hoped would come on at 7:15, or maybe they were listening for the news, which was at 7, or the sports, or the traffic, or the weather, or God knows what else we needed back in, the early to mid 2000s, where even the mid 2010s, where that kind of information wasn't yet available on these things. And now, obviously, that's changed. Now, I've often said that I traded 1,000 FM listeners for one podcast listener is the best trade I ever made. And I mean that. It's not some glib thing that we put on as a subtitle to someone's
no, I get
biography
it. I
10
mean,
years after
the
they're dead.
the digital space is about niches, about reaching niches, not
But it's
meeting the
about the. I always say, reach the audience that counts. Don't count the audience you reach, which goes against the advertising and marketing
I
people
was
who
going
are
to
all,
say,
all
isn't that's the
complete
biggest challenge
assholes.
is
They're
selling
all
that to
assholes,
advertisers.
but they're all failures. And thanks to COVID, we'll see even more of them fall, and not a moment too soon. It couldn't happen to nicer people, frankly. The other thing is that this audience chooses you. You don't target market them, which means that they're the ones who make the decisions. And I think that that's tremendously honorable. It's the most real. You know, people complain a lot about capitalism these days, but the most important moving part of capitalism is that you and I decide that we want to trade with each other voluntarily, as
And if
opposed to
nobody
any
wants to
kind of.
listen, you don't have a show.
Right. And I will say, and I have said on a number of occasions, if you don't like what we're doing, or you think that there's something that should be added or subtracted, you can either send me an email, which I may or may not decide to take on board, or you can just fuck off, because I'm actually not really interested in doing this for one complaining, whining, bitching person who would have usually gone to the BCCSA in the days of broadcast radio, and whom I hold no candle for. Either you join the party or you go home. And I'm
carefully.
Oh, plenty. I've still got I still have the record at the BCCSA for the most complaints ever lodged against a single person in South Africa.
That deserves this whiskey at least.
Thank you. I
want to
agree.
ask you this thing. You know, when I came onto Five, the one thing that was shocking to me.
When did you go on?
I think it was it 2010ish maybe. I think you was we were on. You were there for a couple of years.
Simultaneously, yeah.
The one thing that was shocking, because I didn't come from this world at all. I'd worked hard to get there.
You were a musician.
I was passionate about radio, always had been, and it was something I wanted to do. And I had this illusion, which this industry tends to destroy a lot of, that Five, like being a DJ on Five during the heyday, because that was the sort of back end of the heyday, was going to be a great experience. But the culture at 5FM was so rotten. When I got there, everyone was fucking miserable all the time. They hated being there, in my opinion, from where I was. They hated being there. They hated doing stuff. They hated, I don't know what it was. It was such a shock to me. It was like, how can people get to this?
Yeah. So there are a number of things here that we need to unpack. The first one is this was the SABC, and the SABC is a clusterfuck at the best of times. I mean, it's never been run well. It's a disaster. It's a complicated piece of machinery. Someone once explained that even if you've got the best CEO in the world to run the SABC, it would be like getting a brontosaurus to turn left. No matter how you pull on those reins, it's not going to happen. It was an old dinosaur. It was a state broadcaster that never had the kind of infrastructure that the BBC had, but it was based largely on that model. And you also have to remember that the kind of people who were put in charge of the talent at the SABC were never people who appreciated or understood that talent. So I used to avoid, like the plague, having any kind of meeting with management. I'd go in and do my show, and I'd get out as quickly as I could. Now, what you said earlier about what a toxic and ugly place it was to work, I never felt that because I didn't involve myself in anything but my show. I would arrive in the morning with my team, Tabo, Leanne, Damon, Sias, Mabali. We would do our show. We had record ratings. I think we gained the largest audience 5FM have ever had in their history, which I'm very, very proud of. We had more advertisers. We were bringing in more money than any show in 5FM's history, which I was also very proud of, because if you're not pleasing your advertisers and your listeners, you're only doing half the job. And I would leave at 9. I mean, I was out of that building, gone before the clock struck 9:02. I was gone. I don't know who did the show after me. I never paid attention. I never listened to any of it. The only person I got along with well there at the time I was there was Fresh, because he and I used to talk privately and we would socialize together
and also
outside of the radio station.
He just avoided everyone.
Also that it wasn't about the station. I wasn't buying into a corporation. I was looking for a satellite family. I was doing a show. I was paid to do 3 hours of the best radio I could do. I was breaking rules. I was doing new things. I was having the time of my life. And we did. I mean, our kind of catchphrases and watchwords became artifacts of culture. which I'm very proud of. You know, things like The Weekend Baby and Puza Thursday and the kind of racial stuff that we spoke about on my show, which has never been really cracked since, mostly not because we were so talented and brilliant, but because the whole environment has changed so much that makes those kinds of things difficult to do. I loved every second of it. And in, was it 2013, 14, when I looked around and realized that it's not going to get much better than this. I've got an audience which is bigger. No, exactly. And I realized also, in fact, it happened because when Nelson Mandela died in December of 2013, and Fresh and I did that show live through the night, talking to people, taking calls, just kind of gauging the zeitgeist of South Africa, which was, it's one of the proudest moments of my life. And I organized in New York, along with Zelda Lefranci, who was Madiba's PA, and a good friend of mine in New York called Pam Mirrells, who ran an events company. I arranged the first international tribute to Nelson Mandela. It was in February of 2014. It was the first and only international tribute that was okayed by the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And we had Morgan Freeman, President Bill Clinton, the Soweto Gospel Choir, and a number of really important and famous people, including the first Black mayor of New York, and a number of really, really luminary people in New York society. I mean, it was the event to be at in 2014. And we put this thing together, and I remember going to my station manager at the time and saying to her, listen, we're doing this amazing international event. Don't you think it would be worth getting a rig together so that I can do this show live from New York? I mean, you know, Nelson Mandela, the most famous South African that ever lived. It would seem to me that this would be a media event that would be worth paying money for. And she said, I'm not sure this is our target market. And I suddenly thought, you know, there's no way I can save you. Wow. There's absolutely nothing I can do for you. You are a complete fucking idiot, and you don't deserve to have what we're about to do. So I went over there and did the show anyway. I ended up on stage. Can you imagine me reading excerpts from A Long Walk to Freedom alongside Morgan Freeman? I mean, for anyone, this would be the highlight of their life. I met Bill Clinton and introduced him as Madiba's friend, the former president of the United States of America, who gave the most glittering, glowing, beautiful, heartfelt eulogy that was not given at his actual funeral in Punu, because that was mostly family who spoke. But when Bill Clinton spoke about him, it brought tears to everyone's eyes. And I remember thinking about this while I was there and thinking, these assholes don't actually get it. I can't work for people who I think are this stupid. So I had to get out. And in 2014, I came back, having made the decision at a cheesecake shop in 7th Avenue with my business partner and longtime manager, Rena Brumberg. I got back and I said to them, guys, what's your plan? What's your plan for April? No, I had to get myself a bit of groundwork so I could put my plan into action. And I had the idea of creating something on the internet for a while before that, but it was all about timing. And then when we eventually got going, it was really a question of keeping it secret, because management had no idea that I wasn't going to re-sign my contract. They thought this was in the bag, you know. Like most DJs, this guy needs this paycheck more than anything else, and he'll do whatever we need him to. And at the SABC, you don't negotiate so much as you take what they give you or less. And it was really hard to keep it under wraps, because eventually they only found out a week and a half before I resigned. And it blew them apart because they had no contingency plan. They ended up putting poor old, what's his name? He used to work with Anele. No. He used to work with Anele. Grant Nash. Yeah. Terrific guy. I mean, I have all the time in the world for Grant. But he was a placeholder for, I think, 3 months until Fresh was ready to take over the morning show. And even that was a stopgap because Fresh wasn't ready to do that show. And I mean, I fucked them properly. It felt nasty, but it felt really good. And I know that the audience now is probably an eighth of what it was when I left. And that's pretty devastating.
Mm,
If you're
mm,
sitting doing the morning show on the one of the biggest commercial stations in the country that has a signal that reaches everywhere in South Africa that's urban, and you have an eighth of the audience that the person who was on before you has, you've failed dismally. Not only that
mm.
DJ who's on, I'm not even sure who's doing the morning show anymore, but the management, they have to take responsibility for fucking up that badly. It's great. I love it. I love leaving when you're at the top of your game and when you know that what you're doing is the most important thing that you could have done for that time that you are on there. So that's a long story to answer your
Mm.
question.
Well, tell me about those early days starting Cliff Central and the challenges you faced being really a pioneer into a really tricky space that doesn't operate by any of the rules that you may have thought at the time.
Just to remark on this whiskey, it's getting better and better.
It's good, eh?
Um,
Yeah.
it's really good. Look, you were there. I remember you were kind of an auxiliary part of the team for a little while, at least in terms of when we began and for that month leading up to the actual launch. I remember we spoke to you about music and about
Oh,
doing all
yeah,
kinds
yeah.
of
I
things.
vaguely remember about giving you some songs. That's all I remember. There you go.
All right. So, John, I'm always ready to give credit to the people who were there at the beginning when there were very few people who believed that what we could do would work, and you were one of them. And I remember asking you, could you maybe help us to develop kind of a sound um, in the original kind of radio imaging space? And I remember how much time and effort you dedicated to this, which is one of the reasons why I'm talking to you tonight, because there were very few people who were our allies at that stage. I mean, they were good allies to have, all of them powerful, significant people who I appreciate the support of. There were also lots of people who thought we would be a 6-month story and we'd be gone. Lots of them. They were saying
Mm.
it all over social media. Oh, this is a disaster. This is the worst idea ever. Who's going to pay for this asshole Gareth Cliff? Who, he's all he is an opinionated bag of noise, and uh, frankly, he's distasteful to many people, and he doesn't really speak for anyone. And who the hell does he think he is? Blah blah blah. And people like you who made the difference of giving us the confidence to do what we did at that stage made an enormous difference to people like me who were trying to do something new but weren't entirely sure whether our timing was right or that we would reach the critical mass that we needed to reach. So it's a really beautiful story. I had lots
Mm.
of fun. It was extremely trying at
Mm.
times. If you ask me on a good day, I'll tell you that it felt like 5 minutes. If you ask me on a bad day, I'll tell you that it felt like 6 months for every day.
Mm.
And it's a moment of some pride and a recollection of some real madness that gives me pause to reflect on what we did. I think we were doing things that no one else had thought about doing. I put anyone on the air who had an idea, from some drunk guy in the street who wandered in because he saw a queue of people outside, and I gave him a show, and he was drunk. He was
Amazing.
drunk from the
That's
beginning of
my
the
type of
show
show
to
right
the
there.
end. Yeah, and remember, this is before any of this stuff had been done in South Africa.
Mm.
There were people who'd never
You were
had
on
a
WeChat at
microphone
the
in front.
beginning, right? Or is that how?
Correct, correct.
Yeah, yeah.
So what happened there is that Brett Loebscher, who was the CEO of WeChat, had a fortuitous meeting with Rena at some point, and they were ready to launch WeChat, which at that stage was completely unknown in South Africa, and we were ready to launch Cliff Central. And he said, "Look, why don't we sponsor Gareth in effect?" So they were sponsoring me and my brand, whatever that was at that stage, to do whatever we were going to do. And it took enormous trust from them to do it. And that gave us enough capital to start without having to have investors, because the only two shareholders throughout the history of Cliff Central have been me and Rena. We've never had to borrow money. We've never owed anybody money. And we've never had to beg anyone for money, which I think is really important, because in this current media environment, there are lots of people who are beholden. They're
Mm.
beholden to political actors. They're beholden to investors. And often the investors have no idea of how free speech works or how broadcasting works or any of that stuff. So
Well,
that
nobody
made
knows
an
how digital broadcasting works. Nobody. So
no, that's absolutely true. I mean, we're
yeah.
figuring it out every day because it's brand new.
Mm.
And the ones who've done extremely well are, I mean, Joe Rogan started his podcast, I think 4 years before we started Cliff Central. And I was listening to podcasts probably about 10 years before 2014 when we launched. So in 2004, I'd started to listen to podcasts. I was listening to, and what they would do is they'd record radio shows or TV shows, and they'd just put the recordings online for you to listen to. And sometimes it was really good, and sometimes it was really terrible. But I developed an inkling that this was what was in the future, where every listener would effectively be the program director of their own morning commute or afternoon commute or time they had at home. And that, for me, was a little canary in the coal mine about what was likely to happen with radio and television.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this. You know that I've run a radio station for the last 4 years.
I do.
You know that.
I do, yeah.
I mean, I know your pain. And one of the things that I think is most challenging, as you was just saying now, is that the advertisers do not understand the space. And 90% of the job is actually education, not selling advertising space around what you said earlier about the fact that you're 1,000 engaged listeners is way more valuable than 100,000 unengaged listenership. And
Correct.
it doesn't have any space at all in this environment. And so even now, years later, it's still to me, it's I'm just sitting, like my station is just simmering because I thought what would take 2 years is now 4 years, and the industry hasn't caught up. It's still.
Well, can I tell you what's even more disappointing is that we're at 6 years of Cliff Central. We turned 6 in May, and I realized just before our 6th birthday with coronavirus that this has set us back where we were just starting to take off. You could just feel that the wheels were greased and clients understood, and podcasting was on the up, and it was really turning into a serious business. And then Corona struck, and marketing budgets were just slashed, and advertising went through the shitter. And the problem is, it's both a problem and a solution. The problem is that while there's less money in the system, the solution is that more people are realizing that there's a very powerful value to doing the kind of thing that we're doing right now, that cliffcentral.com does, that we've done with a number of our existing clients and with clients who've just come on board recently. And it's slowly starting to tick over in people's minds. But if Corona hadn't happened, we'd probably be a company that was maybe 2-3 times more valuable than we are now.
Well,
and that irritates me.
I would say this. I'm currently, I don't want to say too much, I'm doing a lot of work on traditional radio with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I structure it is that I sort of make the digital stuff aspects of it a value add because it's easier to sell. But I'll tell you this, and I don't know, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. It is my sort of first-hand impression that what Corona did was the traditional radio stations were driving very hard on driving to work and driving back, and that isn't
falling
happening.
apart, right? Yeah.
So this sort of domination by the traditional, I don't think my personal opinion is I don't think people are listening to radio at all.
No, we know they're not. So I've got a TV. Yeah, we know they're not. I mean, you can see it in the ratings. And the ratings are a completely inaccurate and wholly unreliable source of information.
But the ratings aren't.
But they're the only. Yeah, but they're the only. No. But remember that they've turned this stuff down, and they've essentially applied an algorithm to it to make it look like it's not failing.
Well,
but we know that it's failing.
Saying that's why you say we know. The numbers don't. I'm just gauging from what I'm seeing on the ground from the
okay, there have always been 4 ways to measure an audience going up or down. The first one is the ratings diaries, which advertising businesses live or die for. And they say, well, if you advertise here, you'll get this many people listening. So it's inaccurate. That what they actually do, and I filled in one of these surveys once, they didn't know that they were handing it to the devil, but they gave me a 7-day diary to fill in. And you actually put in, well, I drank a Coca-Cola at 12. I mean, who? That's the most inaccurate thing in the world. And it's 1980s technology for something which you can measure digitally now. So that's rubbish, but it's still something that they take seriously. Yeah. Second one is by direct feedback. This is people who tell you, oh, we're listening. People who say, that they've got friends who listen. You get emails from people, and you get WhatsApps from people, and that kind of thing. So that gives you an indication of whether or not you're making any headway at all. If you're getting no feedback from the people you actually know, it's probably likely that it hasn't even entered. Yeah, correct. The third way is the advertising. So if people are prepared to put their money where your mouth is, then it must be working, because they've probably done their own research. They've asked around their own business. They've found out who their target market are. They've probably done their own market research, which now is ubiquitous, because thanks to social media, you can put a question on Facebook and find out what your buyers are listening to. Mm-hmm. You don't need to go to the ratings diaries. So that's a very powerful way of doing it. The fourth way is by the amount of press you get. And from that point of view, we've always punched above our weight. I seem to always have got more attention from the press than I've deserved or wanted. I know it sounds really trite, and I want you to take me very seriously here, because this is something that I can prove to you again and again. I have never been interested in attention or in fame or in celebrity. And on the few occasions that we've met publicly, you know this to be true, because I'm awkward and I'm uncomfortable around people that I don't know. And I'm not particularly pleased with the idea that people want to take a picture with me or want an autograph from me. And it's always been very weird to me. I've always thought it was uncomfortable, at least. And remarkably somehow, because perhaps of the opinions that I hold and the fact that I'm not scared to voice them, which is also the reason I got the job on Idols, it's harder than you think for some people, because most of us are trying so hard to be popular. Most of us are trying so hard to be liked. We want to be approved of by other people. And for many people, that is the chief motivator for the reason that they say and do things. And this has never been of any interest to me. I live my life regardless of how many people say yes or say no. I'm not really that thrilled about being praised, which is something I learned from the works of Socrates, who would leave the stage when people applauded after he made a really good point. He'd just leave. And I thought, you know what a guy. Here's the greatest philosopher in human history. And the moment he thought that you were applauding because he was saying something that you liked or that it made him famous, he was gone. He was out of there. Yeah. He gave the middle finger, right? Yeah. And then on the other hand, the fact that there has to be, because you're in broadcasting and in television, there's this element of having to be popular, because otherwise the ratings don't count in your favor and people don't really know that you're doing a good job. So it's your report card. And this thing always bothered me. But anyone who knows me well, will tell you that was never something that interested me. However, we got lots of press, always. Everything I said and did, and it continues to be the problem, that any time I write an open letter to the president, which anyone could, there is not a human being in the world.
But you are,
right.
The irony of what you're saying, I know what you're saying is true, but the irony is, like, you are, somehow, you have managed to, you are the definition of, like, if someone is going, like, I need a celebrity for an event, the first name is going to come to mind when you say the word celebrity is Gareth Cliff. You've got that thing.
Let's say Trevor Noah and probably like Kanye Bao. And
what I'm saying is everything you say is newsworthy, whether you like it or not. And to that point, your radio station, yeah.
I don't agree. I don't think it's newsworthy. I think a lot of the time it's just controversial. It's clickbait.
Oh, yeah.
So people
I'm not giving credit to journalists in this particular thing.
Yeah, please don't, because they really don't know what they're doing. They see a way to an easy story. Yeah.
There's no avoiding it. Gareth Cliff equals celebrity. If there's a celebrity management talent company, the first person they're going to call is Gareth Cliff. When people are saying we need a celebrity, your name is at the top of the list, whether you like it or not. I'm not saying
from your mouth to God's ears. I wish I had made the kind of money that people think I've made, but cliffcentral.com, which took 6 years to establish to the point where we are now. Again, I'm going to reiterate, we've never had any investors. We've never asked anyone for money. There are no angels who are throwing money down at us. Every cent we've made is money we've made through the sweat of our brow, but it's also taken money from Rena and I. I lived on my bond for 3 years. That's never a pleasant thing to do. Thank fuck I had a bond to live on. Some people are not so fortunate. But it's celebrity and fame on its own is worthless
Well, it
Worthless. It's got
isn't.
no
That's my
value.
point. Is that the Cliff name has value. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been called Cliff Central. It would have been called
But
Radio
but with all
Gaga.
the love in the world, with all the love in the world, that wasn't
Yeah.
the reason that it was valuable. It wasn't because I was
No.
famous or because a celebrity. It was because what we've done is tried to establish something that's authentic in a world
Mm.
full of fake bullshit. And that the number of things I've said no to in my career, and you probably do because you've been offered these things too, where people want you to host a game show, or they want you to dress up in some outfit, or to MC some event for a company that you absolutely hate, where they want you to read out their value statement and you think it's an absolute crock of shit. I mean,
Yeah.
I've just said no
Yeah.
to way more things than I've ever said yes to, and maybe that
Mm.
has a value. I don't know, but certainly for me, there's no other way I could have done it.
Mm.
And if that's added value, good. Then that's Rena saying to me, rather pass on this one, where I might have said, take the money, you know?
Tell me more about Rena. This is very interesting. Your relationship with Rena and how your business
So
works.
Rena is, she is probably and she won't mind me saying so, in her 60s. She's extraordinarily worldly. I think of her as an oracle, like the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece. She has an ability to read things that I can't. She, for example, is constantly telling me what's wrong with me, which is always, especially if someone has your back, if someone is prepared to
Mhm.
do that for you, that's the greatest challenge
It's the best.
um, for anyone to rise to. And she's always had my back. She has no ulterior motives. So when Rena says to me, "Your show was shit," or "That wasn't very funny," or "Why are you looking for trouble with these people when they've done nothing to you?" she means it
We
from
should tell you if you've
all the
stepped
best
over a
places.
line. We should call you on it.
Oh, all the time. And in fact, on the rare occasions, and I can probably name them on two hands, that I have done something that's made her genuinely happy or pleased her, that compliment means all the
That's the
more
best.
because
Yeah.
she's so seldom impressed by anything I do. I think most of the time she thinks I'm a bit of an idiot, but she's hung in, and we've been working together for 22 years, and
How
she
did you
has
meet
no
her?
children. Um, Rena and I met when I was at 702. John Burks introduced me to her. John Burks sent. What happened was, I arrived at 702 after I'd been fired from campus radio, and I went to see
Why?
John
Sorry,
Burks, and I
hold on.
said to him,
Why were you fired from campus radio? Just a quick side note.
"Oh, this is an old story. I was fired for a number of reasons. I'd been doing things like recording management meetings and playing out the audio on the air to
Why
show
is this
everybody
not surprising?
what a nasty bitch our station manager was. She was a
Beautiful.
revolting
Come
human
on.
being. I will not mention her name because she's in the law and I don't want to get into trouble. But
Mm.
she was so revolting. She was easily the most unappetizing human being I've ever laid eyes on. So revolting was she, and so frigid that she used to, and this is not a word of a lie, she would she would keep a bucket of ice under her desk in order to keep her private parts frigid throughout the entire meeting that we would have together.
Nonsense. Come on.
Okay, it's rubbish, but it's a fun story.
No, I'm printing that.
Um,
That's my Twitter
no,
feed tomorrow. It's
she
definitely true.
was she was dreadful, and she used to tell me what to do the whole time. And I was a rebellious 19, 20-year old, and I was doing really outrageous things. Like I would pray for other DJs to get cancer, and I would no, it was horrible, dude. You have no idea. You have no idea. I
Yeah.
told this
Awesome.
story. I told this story in one of the highlights of my life in 2001 when I'd been on 702's morning show for about a year and a half. I met
Mm.
Howard Stern, who's the greatest radio broadcaster of all time,
Yes.
right?
Mm.
And Howard said to me, "Tell me about your radio career." On his show, I was being interviewed
Mm.
on the biggest radio show in America. I mean, this was there's no greater moment in my recollection than this. I said, "Well, Howard, I used to do some pretty outrageous stuff. I, wished cancer on fellow DJs who had stolen material from me. I talked about my station manager, who was Shangan from 702, a guy called Dan Moyane, who's now on ENCA. I talked about how Shangan men apparently have the biggest penises in South Africa. And I had my producer, Dudu Moseneke, who was Dikgang Moseneke, the Deputy Chief Justice's daughter. She was my producer on 702, and I became very good friends with her brother Bo Moseneke when he was with me at 5FM subsequently. And I would talk about really, really outrageous shit. I mean, I had on campus radio, I did a penis size competition between the black and the white guys on the campus. And we just took a random sample. I had my newsreader who was
It sounds like
she was a bit of,
radio to me.
she was a bit of a slut. She went out onto the Groot Grasperk at Tuks University and got like 3 black guys and 3 white guys.
Samples.
Yeah, well, she brought them back to the studio and they measured. Nice. And then we got a stripper in and a whole lot of stuff. It was really good radio, but I knew I was sailing close to the wind. I mean, if you're not being a little bit cheeky on campus radio, when are you going to do it?
This is what radio is to me still. Like the stuff you're describing, I'm really into it. That is what radio should be.
Well, I eventually, I think the last straw that broke the camel's back was a series of a few things. The first one being that I interviewed my mother's domestic worker for the weather every day. And she would say things like, need it gaat spat. She was this Cape-colored woman who had a huge sense of humor. And that was her idea of the weather report. You say, nee, gefokken warm wees. Now I have to block the fokken. Because radio, you can't say anything like that. But it was big. It was big at the time. We've got to remember that radio in the 90s we're talking 97, 90.
What station was this?
This was Radio Tuks, the campus radio station of the University of Pretoria. And I mean, I was fired, I think, eventually in 1999 for that and for doing a mock Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where we actually, I mean, this is looking back now, it was quite revolutionary, but at the time I didn't really care. We had P.W. Botha, Magnus Malan, and Adrian Vlok, who were the people who didn't appear in front of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, appear. And I would do their voices and, we would talk about all the things that we'd done that was so awful. I mean, it was intelligent stuff. It wasn't stupid. Nobody, if you ask most people who are even studying political science now, who P.W. Botha, Magnus Malan, and Adrian Vlok were, and whether or not they actually appeared in front of the TRC, I doubt any master's student in political science could actually tell you about that. But we were being clever and we were on the university campus and I thought it was adding value. Anyway, the station manager, who was this heinous bitch, she said, you can't do this and I'm going to fire you. And I said to her, well, you either fire me or I carry on because I'm not going to resign. And so she fired me. I knew what that meant. So the next day, I posed on the front page of the university newspaper like Jesus on the cross. And I said, free speech is dead at the University of Pretoria. And I blew it up and it was I spun it into this huge story. And I suppose in some ways that laid the groundwork for a career in radio, which I'm proud of. I think we've me and the people I've worked with along the way, all of whom are extremely talented people in their own right, we've carved a little niche. I mean, I was the first person to take the news and comment during the news. I would stop the news while Leanne was reading it and say, that is absolutely insane. Or I'd put on a voice, or I'd play a sound effect of a, toilet flushing or something really. Now people do this all the time, but before I did it in this country, no one was doing that stuff. So when I look back now, I'm very proud of that legacy. Toilet flushing noises is an enormously powerful legacy. If you can leave one or two toilet noises during the news, you've done humanity a great service.
Those toilet flushes are important to this. I got to ask you where the do you still have a copy of that front page? Yeah,
I do. So my mother, to her everlasting credit,
She's got a Gareth Cliff wall.
No. She's made an archive for me. It's now 12 volumes big. You know those old scrapbooks that you used to buy?
Why is it not? Is it online or is it is a physical book?
Not a chance. No, I'm not going to share that with anyone. It's none of your business.
I want that cover though. I want to see that.
I'll send it to you on email if you really want it. But it's me posing on the front page.
Because I tell you what,
I'm dressed like Chandler from Friends, because at that stage he was cool, and I'm posing like Jesus on the cross, and it was quite a big deal.
That's what I'm trying to say.
It got lots of attention.
Because the stories you are telling me now, I love them because it really defines the thought that has gone into I'm an outsider. I mean, we know each other, but we haven't spent 45 minutes together in one, probably ever, probably
No, no,
collectively.
no. We'll probably be sick of each other in about 5 minutes. So let's hurry it up.
But it gives me context about how you think about how you approach what you're doing, and that's really inspiring to me because it shows the path of how you were thinking about the stuff. You weren't doing, putting a toilet flush
Well,
in the news is one thing, but the story that precedes it that shows the pattern of how you formulated what you were doing and the intention of it. That to me is really interesting. That's the story
well,
of what you're
there's
doing
this
now.
there's this really interesting dichotomy to what I was always doing, and it became a massive argument between Rena and I, where she would ask, "Who's the real Gareth Cliff? Am I a comedian who's trying to get the laughs and trying to do things that are shocking and entertaining?" And remember, in your 20s, in
Mm.
my early 20s, that's what I was. I mean, in your 20s, you'll do anything for attention. So I
But
knew,
you were still thinking about it then.
well,
That's why I'm
yes.
interested in
I
that
mean,
magazine cover
look,
because that isn't
okay,
accidental. That's a piece of art.
what you've got to,
What you did there.
yeah, but what you've got to realize about me is I'm also a turbo nerd. When I'm not doing my show, I'm interested in history, music, literature, swords, chemistry. I mean,
I
I've
can
got a
see
chemical
when you told
lab.
me
I've
the
got a
story of my
chemical.
whiskey, you told me the
So
fucking story.
I have a full inorganic chemical laboratory in my house. It's a room that's 25 square meters with vacuum cupboards and Bunsen burners and white phosphorus and ammonium chloride and sodium thiosulfate and potassium thiocyanate and things that are probably really, really dangerous to keep in a residential area. But I do this. I'm interested, John, and I think you are too, which is, again, one of the reasons I'm happy to have this conversation with you. I'm not looking for publicity, right? It took a long while for us to actually get this together. And it's not because I was being difficult with you, but it's because normally I just say no to these things. I have an interest in everything that there is to learn about. I'm reading an amazing book by a historian called Simon Sebag Montefiore. He's written a book called Jerusalem, which is about the entire history of Jerusalem from its earliest foundations on Mount Moriah, where Abraham is supposed to have been asked by God to sacrifice Isaac, through the city of David, through the Maccabees, through the exile to Babylonia, through the Roman occupation, through the birth of Jesus, the death of Jesus, Herod and the Herodians, and how they willed that city into almost complete destruction, and then Titus, who eventually conquered it, blah 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 blah. Eventually the Seleucid Empire and everything else. And I have found every part of this so gripping that what it does is it takes you down a rabbit hole where you actually can't stop. And if I did,
Until
I
you
mean,
have
my wish
ammonium
is,
nitrate in your cupboard.
I do have some of that, yeah. But
I'm
ammonium
trying to
nitrate,
make the connection, is what I'm asking.
so it's not, ammonium nitrate's not dangerous if you keep it dry and you keep it clean, which was part of the problem in Lebanon, in Beirut, and that big explosion they had. It
Right.
wasn't clean and it wasn't kept dry. And also, the moment that you, what it is it's a source of oxygen. I can't believe we're jumping from the Maccabees and the
Well,
Seleucids to
just
ammonium
for the
nitrate.
context, you took me into the Maccabees while explaining
Yeah.
why you had chemicals in your cupboard. So I was
True,
trying to,
but
yeah.
the fact is, so let me finish the
Okay.
historian
Uh,
and
I'm
the
happy
book
to
about
separate the
Jerusalem.
two subjects on
What
this occasion.
happens? What happens to me is
Yeah.
you get a glimpse of what I'm thinking and what I do and what I like and who I want to talk to, and you get a glimpse of the sense of humor and everything else from a 2-hour show on cliffcentral.com every morning between Monday and Friday. And I feel like that's enough. I give enough of myself away. But the real Gareth is this interesting dichotomy between someone who is deeply nerdy and extremely geeky and is interested in the detail of history and of chemistry and of architecture and of mathematics. I mean, if you saw what I was doing most days of the week, you'd be horrified at how boring I was. And then there are these, I call them lucidum intervallum, which are in law, that's what you describe. If someone is completely insane, They have
Yeah.
these moments of lucidity, a lucidum intervallum, in which they're actually making choices which they're responsible for. So in law, you can hold someone responsible for the choices that they make during a lucidum intervallum. And during those times,
I love that you're doing it in Latin. That's great.
I'm partying with my friends. I'm drinking in a fortune of tequila. I mean, I can have, again, this is not because I want to be tested.
Your thing.
It's all I drink.
Okay.
I don't drink any wine. This whiskey is as fine as it is. This is a rare thing to see me drinking.
You'd give it up for a tequila in a heartbeat.
No, not really. No. This is much more special. But tequila is my drink of choice. There are 3 reasons to drink tequila. Number 1 is because it contains the least water, and we don't like water because fish fuck in it. The second thing about tequila is it's an upper. Chemically, it's an upper. It's made from the agave plant, and it's the only legal upper. The only other one is champagne, which has a much more muted effect, and then obviously cocaine, which has got an illegality to it. But the third reason you drink tequila is because it always comes in a square bottle. And the reason that the tequila is in a square bottle is because if you pass out, it won't roll away from you.
That's sweet, but the truth is, we both know tequila is the worst drink, and you are so obsessed with publicity and fame that you just say you like it to try and create headlines. We both know that to be the truth.
Sure. Ask anybody who knows me.
Well, cheers to that. Okay, well, we're still coming back from Mount Sinai to your cupboard of ammonium nitrate, and I'm just trying to understand that connection.
It's all right. So we've spoken about the love for history and everything else, but chemistry is interesting because what you're doing is you're playing.
Dan Carlin's podcast, obviously, right?
I do. I've listened to Dan Carlin. I love Dan Carlin.
Yeah. Okay.
No,
he actually
absolutely spectacular.
I never had an interest in history till I discovered Dan Carlin. That guy, that is the way.
You know, he did an 8-hour-long podcast on World War I, and I remember sitting in my car because I was at that stage I was still doing 30 to 40-minute commutes in the mornings and the same in the afternoons if there was traffic more, and I get road rage, and I would listen to a Dan Carlin podcast, and it was never long enough for me, despite being 8 hours long, because he would talk about the
year. You've got to be super patient to follow that guy.
What a spectacular storyteller! He talks about the Battle of Verdun in World War I, where they were firing these enormous shells that were turning entire forests into matchsticks and creating these massive craters in the earth that were then filled with the blood and the lead and the poison and the chlorine and the organic matter of all those animals that had died in the area. And how these men came out of the forts in the French Maginot Line to find water to drink because they'd been stuck underground during the bombardment. They'd come out of these forts and they would drink the water with their hands, and this water was putrid. I mean, it was filled with death, and they would drink it because they were so fucking thirsty. And the way he describes these things is just so moving that, again, unless you've studied history, you have no appreciation for where we are at the moment. And I know that we're running out of time here, so I'll hop to chemistry quickly. Chemistry is the study of.
I'm going to follow up on that next. So just putting a pin in that.
Well, chemistry is the study of what everything's made of, and I've always been interested in chemistry. I can give you the periodic table from element 1 to element 120
Did you
right
study
now.
Science? Is this something?
I loved science.
Oh, okay.
I was at 14. All I wanted was to have my own laboratory. And I eventually got it right at 38, that I built my own lab. What you're dealing with in the periodic table is you're dealing with God's cookbook. A lot of people like Jamie Oliver or, these celebrity chefs, Nigella Lawson or whatever it is. And they think, well, if I've made a banana bread, I'm some kind of genius. And of course, what happens with any kind of food is it's either eaten or it's just thrown away. And if it's eaten, it still turns into shit anyway. But with God's recipe book, you're actually creating things that, and I don't deal in organic chemistry, which is why people always go, oh, you're running a meth lab. And I'm like, no, I don't know how to make crystal meth. If I did, I'd be.
To my credit, I avoided that joke earlier, just so
Yeah, well
good
done.
on me.
No,
Thank you.
congratulations. So I'm covering it anyway because
Cool.
I don't do organic chemistry, so I can't make any drugs. But what
Mm-hmm.
I can do is I can show you the most incredible interactions between the elements and how they make everything that there is in the universe. In those 112 maybe of the naturally occurring elements, they are everything that there is. There are no other atoms in
Can I tell?
existence
I have to just say
but
this was
those.
one of the most life-changing moments for me ever was watching Brian Cox
Mm,
sit on a beach and
yes.
pick up the sand and say the elements in the sand are all the elements in the entire universe. And I was like, fuck, I had never thought about it that way. That was mind-boggling to me, which obviously not to you. That's what you're
Brian
saying.
Cox is great. No, no. Well, this is the point. Is I've always been fascinated by it. So what I've done is I've amassed a
Mm.
collection of, and I collect coins, I collect swords, I collect books. I mean, you've come to my house one day. I've got a 1614 book that was given to me as a birthday present 2 years ago by someone who is a very dear friend of mine and who obviously has too much money. She gave me a book that was made on essentially the kind of press that the Gutenberg press would have been. It was
Cool.
published in 1614. That's before any white person had ever set foot in the Cape. It was published at the time that King Charles I still had his head on his shoulders, and when King Louis XIV ruled at Versailles over the Empire of France. This is something extraordinary. When you hold this in your hands, you feel something. But I've collected a sample of every element that you can own in the world, that you can legally have. There are some like plutonium that if you try to get hold of them, the US Secret Service puts you on a watch list. So I've stayed away from those. But
For good reason.
yeah, but I've
Mm.
got I've got a little bit, and in the case of some of the more expensive elements like iridium and rhodium, a very, very little bit of every one of God's
That is
cupboard ingredients in his kitchen.
fucking beautiful and amazing.
It makes me happy,
Um,
and
I could
I
be
do
obsessed with
things
that
like,
very quickly.
I'll burn them. I'll burn them in a Bunsen burner to see. For example, barium salts burn green, and strontium salts burn red, and sodium is yellow, and potassium is lilac. And these things are interesting because you can take anything. You can essentially find a rock in your garden, and you can sand it until you've got a very fine powder, and you can do various experiments with that powder to figure out what the constituent elements of that rock are. And all of them, from diamond, which is pure carbon, which is arranged in a different lattice to graphite, all the way through from that to something very, very complicated like an emerald, which has got beryllium, aluminium, silicate in it. These are things that I can't go to sleep at night unless I know the answer to them.
Mm.
Sometimes I'll look up the name of the daughter of King Henry III of England just because I can't go to sleep until I know who she was, because she figures into a story during the Second Crusade. And these are the things that keep me up at night. So
But you,
while
you,
radio,
mm, sorry,
yeah,
carry on.
while radio is the thing I do for a living, and I've done okay in that respect, I'm interested in living. I'm interested in everything that there is to learn, and life to me is the greatest gift of all. I want to live forever. I know I won't, but so far I've never been bored ever.
You obviously see the glaring, what makes you great at what you do is your obsession to deconstruct. It's what makes you a great interviewer. What makes you a great radio DJ is your um, Tarantino-esque obsession to find out more about your meth lab is essentially uh,
It's not
is what you
okay,
do. It is a metaphor for what you do in radio. Obviously, you
dude.
put lots of thought in. You want to understand how everything works. You don't just ask a frivolous question. You want to understand the deeper thing of what makes the universe ticks. It's what makes obviously Gareth Cliff. Gareth, that's your secret sauce right there. You must know that, right? It's not a weird left hand obsession. It's the center of everything you do.
I'm not going to argue with you because I see it's 10 o'clock already. Um, But you
I have one. I'm
radio's
not letting you go into. I've got
radio
one more. Yeah.
radio is actually
Karen.
the easiest part. The radio is the easiest part of my day. I do very to the eternal annoyance of those who work with me and for me. Radio is the part of the day that I prepare the least for. Everything else takes up much more of my time and of my imagination.
I'm just glad that other people are annoyed working. I mean, everyone annoyed working with me. I'm very annoying to work with. Before I let you go, and I just want to say I really appreciate it, and also I didn't realize you'd made an exception to actually do this with me. So I really, really appreciate doubly that you agreed to be on here.
It's my pleasure.
I'm not asking you this question to be overtly controversial, but I think it's deeply related to what you were talking about with history.
Yeah.
As opposed to knee jerk. And the question I'm asking you is what your opinion is on what's happening on in America right now, because I'm not setting you up for this, but I'm just saying I think I have probably a very different opinion on this, one that I don't talk about because it's probably politically incorrect. But
well, tell me yours first, so I know that
but
I'm in a safe zone.
No,
go on. If you're asking me to
put
my life on the line, you do yours. Come on.
Well, I just say that this is that.
Have some balls, John Savage. Come on.
Okay, I'm saying it for this. I want to give context to it so that, you know, I mean, just for a side thing, what you reminded me of today, something I've never thought about earlier, is that when I was trying to get onto Five, I spent 3 years trying to get onto Five, and one of the things I did, which I've never spoken about and never will, is I made a video for what my radio show was going to be like. And in that video, I literally put shoe polish on my face and did a B.A. Baracus impression.
Oh, wow. You did blackface. Jesus. You would be fired for that in a fucking second.
I'm just trying to say that I got
racist.
So that's on Five.
Okay.
My feeling
I hope you destroyed all the evidence of that.
No, they showed it to me years later. They have it there. I don't have a copy of it. They do.
Make sure you get hold of it and destroy it.
Yeah, I'm interested in this opinion from you because of things that you've said, basically on your history and your periodic table statement. And the thing is, America is burning to the ground. In my opinion, the media is fucking lost, like fucked big time. But if you look at precedent and history, it gives you a different perspective to what's happening on. I don't think that Trump, who is a douchebag, without doubt, is doing a bad job, actually. And if you look historically at what is happening in America, nothing he is doing is controversial, but everything's made controversial because I think everyone is looking at the context of the now and not the historical stuff. That's a big deal for me to say that out loud. Because there's no one you can have this discussion with without being crucified.
Here's the problem, is that you first have to create this caveat that you think he's a douchebag. Well, it should be fairly obvious to almost anyone who's paying attention that Donald Trump is an egotistical, egomaniacal, narcissistic nutcase, right?
Which is not a particularly rare quality, actually.
Who in the history of humanity that has achieved anything of any noteworthiness anyone has not had those characteristics? In other words, which friendly Mother Teresa type have you seen rising to the top of an empire? This man, and
other than Gareth Cliff.
Let's do no one any special service or any disservice by admitting the fact that in order to achieve even half the things that Donald Trump has in his life, you would have to be someone quite extraordinary. I don't know anyone.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone.
I mean, what he's doing in the Middle East is fucking exceptional for someone who's supposedly retarded.
So don't create caveats. Don't say, well, because he's a douchebag, blah, blah, blah. Just say, you know what?
Yeah.
History, one day, in 100 years from now, history will say that this was one of the most eccentric and dynamic and obvious leaders of humanity in the 21st century, where there was this dearth of leaders. I mean, people look up to someone like Angela Merkel, who's about as bureaucratic as my computer. And they think that this woman's a winner. Are you joking? Are you telling me that Greta Thunberg or Angela Merkel or Boris Johnson or David Cameron or Theresa May or Cyril Ramaphosa are leaders? No one. I promise you, you will look into the footnotes of history to find any remarkable things said about any of those people. But Donald Trump's name will be etched into the history of humankind as loudly and as boldly as the names of John F. Kennedy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Lincoln, and Washington when it comes to presidents of the United States. He is an outlier in every sense of the word. And as much as you find him distasteful, and I do too, this man, if he does not win in November, if the Democrats win with that half-dead carcass that is Joe Biden,
fully dead,
and with their leftist agenda,
it's fucked.
if they
the
win,
country's fucked.
If
it's the end of the country.
Democrat, I hate to say it, but Western civilization is at an end if Joe Biden wins in November. So go Trump. I have a MAGA hat.
Unfortunately,
I have a MAGA hat at home. I'm going to be wearing it with pride in the month of November, just to fuck with people who are. You know what half the reason is I like Donald Trump? In fact, 3/4 of the reason I like him. 3/4 of the reason I like Donald Trump is because he doesn't care about your fucking feelings.
Yeah, that's true.
He's not trying to be your best friend or your daddy. There are so many people who are been raised badly, and this man must try and put you right.
Put Donald Trump away for a second. The Democratic Party are burning the city to the motherfucking ground out of nothing but pure power-grabbing hatred. That's it. Like, even if you hate Donald Trump, what the Democrats are doing now is the end of the fucking world. It really is, as you say.
It's worse than that. It's an ingratitude for all of the things that civilization has brought us. All of the things that these left-wing lunatics. No, I don't even think it's that. It's a dislike and a distrust and dishonesty about what has come before them. The people who are complaining.
Right at the beginning of this, sorry, carry on.
Go on. No.
I was just saying, right at the beginning of this podcast, you said something really important, and that was everyone hates capitalism. They haven't thought about what socialism actually fucking means, and the idea that you can build your own career based on what people want is actually the divider between these two things.
Yeah, but the important thing there is that it's voluntary. I'm offering to trade with you, whereas any other system that has been tried in human history is a system where the state threatens you with a gun if you don't.
Yes.
So if there is anyone in the world who is willing to complain about capitalism, but they're not prepared to accept the fact that any other system but capitalism involves a monopoly of violence by the state, then they haven't been reading history books. And I haven't got time to argue with people who are that stupid. Sorry.
I'm trying to say this is why it's related to history. There's one question I ask, and then I will leave you to your evening. And that is, for a country that is supposedly so systematically racist, that's so fucked, that is driven by a supposed bigot, Hitler-esque, stormtroopers, Nazi motherfucker, why is everyone on this planet trying to escape the countries they're in to get into that motherfucking country? And that in that
precisely.
lies...
I mean, why are the lights on at night? If you fly a satellite over Korea, why are the lights on in South Korea and they're off in North Korea? Why isn't all the traffic going from Cuba to Florida and not from Florida to Cuba? There is your answer. I don't need to argue this. If you want to look at what's actually happening on the ground, go ahead. If you prefer to delude yourself with lies, I cannot trust you as an honest agent of your own cognitive enterprises. I'm afraid you're a dishonest person, and I cannot be in your company.
With that, I'd like to say, cheers to you, Gareth.
Thank you.
I
cheers to you.
Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
And I don't know a lot about you, but I have a lot of respect for who you are and what you do, and this chat has strengthened that. So thank you for being who you are, and keep on doing what you do.
I will not forget the support that you gave us in our early days at Cliff Central. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
I think you have over-exaggerated that, to be fair.
No.
Anyway.
No, there's no exaggeration. Thank you. Cheers, John.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.